Today we will be discussing Chapter 9, Section 1, which is found on page 219 of your book. It is titled Studying Human Populations. When you finish this section, you should be able to describe how the size and growth of the human population has changed in the last 200 years, define 4 properties that scientists use to predict population sizes, make predictions about population trends based on age structure, describe the 4 stages of demographic transition, and explain why different countries may be at different stages of the demographic transition. Examine this graph, which is also found on page 219, and describe the changes in the human population over time. I would like you to hypothesize why the human population has grown so rapidly in the 20th century. Write your response in your science journal. In this lesson, you will learn the factors that affect human population growth and decline. Demography is the study of characteristics of populations, especially human populations. Demographers study the historical size and makeup of populations of countries to make comparisons and predictions. They also study properties that affect population growth, such as economics and social structure. Countries with similar population trends are often grouped into 2 general categories: developed and developing countries. Developed countries have higher average incomes, slower population growth, diverse industrial economies, and stronger social support systems, while developing countries have lower average incomes, simple and agricultural-based economics, and rapid population growth. Let's take a closer look at this graph found on page 219. The human population underwent exponential growth in the 1800s, meaning the population growth rate increased during each decade. These increases were mostly due to increases in food production and improvements in hygiene that came with the industrial and scientific revolution. However, it is unlikely that the Earth can sustain this growth for much longer. Age structure is the classification of members of a population into groups according to age and are tools that help demographers make predictions. Countries that have high rates of growth usually have more young people than older people. In contrast, countries that have slow growth or no growth usually have an even distribution of ages in the population. This graph is called a population pyramid. You can see it is a type of double-sided bar graph and shows the typical age structures for countries that have different rates of growth. Please pay attention to the graphs throughout this chapter because you will be required to take information off these graphs for the graded assignments. Survivorship is the percentage of newborn individuals in a population that can be expected to survive to a given age. It is used as another way to predict population trends. To predict survivorship, demographers study a group of people born at the same time and note when each member of the group dies. The results of these studies are then plotted on a graph and might look like the graph shown in this slide. Wealthy developed countries such as Japan and Germany currently have a type 1 survivorship curve because most people live to adulthood and death occurs during old age. Type 2 populations have a similar death rate at all ages. An individual's chance of dying is independent of his age. And a Type 3 survivorship is the pattern in which many offspring die. Few individuals live to adulthood, with the chance of dying decreasing with age. Both Type 1 and Type 3 may result in populations that remain the same size or grow slowly. A fertility rate is the number of births, usually per year, per 1,000 women of childbearing age, which is usually ages 15 to 44. Replacement level is the average number of children each parent must have in order to replace themselves. This number is slightly more than 2 because not all children born will survive and reproduce. This graph shows the historical fertility rates for the United States. In 1972, the total fertility dropped below replacement level for the first time in U.S. history. The fertility rate remained below replacement level for most of the 1990s, but has recently been growing partially because the children of the baby boom era grew up and they had children themselves. Migration in general is any movement of individuals or populations from one location to another. Movement into an area is immigration, and movement out of an area is emigration. Immigration is one reason why populations of many developed countries are increasing. This graph shows how migration between and within countries is a significant part of population change. The dramatic increase in the Earth's human population in the last 200 years has happened because death rates have declined more rapidly than birth rates. Death rates have declined mainly because more people have access to adequate food, clean water, and safe sewage disposal. Also, the discovery of vaccines in the 20th century contributed to the decline in death rates. Life expectancy is the average length of time that an individual is expected to live. Life expectancy is most affected by infant mortality, the death rate of infants less than a year old. Expensive medical care is not necessarily helpful in preventing infant deaths. Infant health is more affected by parents' access to education, food, fuel, and clean water. The graph shows the average life expectancy worldwide has increased to more than 67 years old, but new threats such as tuberculosis and AIDS are becoming a concern as populations become denser. The demographic transition is the general pattern of change from high birth and death rates to low birth and death rates as a country develops from a pre-industrial economic system to an industrial economic system. The theory behind the demographic transition is that industrial development causes economic and social progress that then affects population growth. This graph is found on page 223 in the book. Notice in the first stage of the demographic transition, a society is in a pre-industrial condition. The birth rate and death rates are both at high levels and the population size is stable. In the second stage, a population explosion occurs. Death rates decline as hygiene, nutrition, and education improve, but birth rates remain high, so the population grows very fast. In the third stage, population growth slows because birth rate decreases. As the birth rate becomes close to the death rate, the population size stabilizes. However, the population is much larger than before the demographic transition. In the fourth stage, the birth rate drops below replacement level, so the size of the population begins to decrease. It can take from 1 to 3 generations for the demographic transition to occur. The factors most clearly related to a decline in birth rates are increasing education and economic independence for women. In the demographic transition model, the lower death rate of the second stage is usually the result of increased levels of education. Educated women find that they do not need to bear as many children to ensure that some will survive. They also learn family planning techniques. Women are able to contribute to their families' increasing prosperity while spending less energy bearing and caring for children. As countries modernize, parents are more likely to work away from home. If parents must pay for childcare, children may become a financial burden rather than an asset. All of these reasons contribute to lower birth rates in both developed and developing countries.